Today is January 21st, 2025. Mr. Touradj Ebrahimi, on January 14th, 1984, you arrived from Iran in Switzerland. So this was really a moment where you didn't expect, I imagine, to stay for so long, because today, many years later, you still live in Switzerland.
Yes, I still remember that day. I was on a Swissair flight that landed in Geneva. It was the Valentine's Day, the 14th February 1984. Cold and very, very tidy. So, of course, I had a lot of experience in France, but compared to France, Switzerland continues to be much more in order, much more tidy, much cleaner. So this I remember. I also remember that that day I was seeing a lot of people, because we in those days when we landed in Montreux, the airport of Geneva, we did not plan to stay in Geneva. There were trains or coaches, buses, shuttles that would take people from the Geneva airport to Lausanne. So we actually, me and my mother, who was with me, we took an airport shuttle that took us to Ouchy. And then from there, we had a hotel reserved in the center of Lausanne. I believe this hotel probably doesn't exist. I don't remember its name, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't exist anymore. And this is how I arrived, late during night in the city of Lausanne. In my mind, Lausanne was a step towards a future that was not necessarily going to be in Switzerland. I was in Switzerland at that time because I had to study. I needed to have a university degree if I wanted to. At least that's what my parents thought. That it's very important for me to have a university degree, and so the plan was at that time pretty clear. Do my best to get an engineering degree, like my father had. And then maybe this will be a stepstone towards either returning to Iran or going to United States, like most Iranians were dreaming of at that time.
When you arrived in Switzerland, you were largely in a hotel, but you didn't have planned before then an apartment, or how long did you imagine you would stay in a hotel, arriving and planning to study in Lausanne?
Yeah, so I came to Switzerland early during the year, and usually the universities, the first year, let's say, of universities at that time were in October. So I actually had plenty of time in front of me to get acquainted and find an apartment and so forth.
How long did it take you to find an apartment?
It took a while. It wasn't easy. It's still not easy. So the problem of finding a suitable apartment to live in has always been one of those difficult things that any newcomer to Switzerland is familiar with, especially students, because you cannot just pay any amount of rent that you like, and usually you're looking for a place that is good for just one person. I believe it took me about a month to find a place. Of course, this involved contacting an agency, and they helped us reading newspapers, all the announcements, contacting also the University of Lausanne, not EPFL, the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, but the University of Lausanne, that had a service that would help students to find housing. It was relatively easy, or at least easier, to find a room in somebody's house. It was a little bit more difficult to find a room in a dorm, because there are dorms that are offered. But my parents, they probably wanted that I have my own place. So I was looking for either a one-bedroom apartment or a studio, as it is called, and this is what I was looking for.
And what did you find, actually?
So in the beginning, after a month, I found in the center of Lausanne a place, a studio, which was absolutely fantastic. I was really lucky. It was a furnished studio, so it already had beds and all the furniture that was needed. And it was really lucky because I remember it had a balcony and a view on the lake.
Which part of Lausanne was this?
Oh, I can tell you exactly even the address. It was Chemin des Aubépines 11. So this is not very far from Beaulieu, which is, one of the main, let's call it, exhibit centers of Lausanne. So walking distance from Beaulieu, but a little bit down on a hill. And that's why the building was in a place where the front side was really open towards the lake and the mountains in France behind the lake.
In 1984, when you arrived, Iran had made just a few years before its revolution, and being an Iranian coming let's say in a Western country like Switzerland, how do you remember having been considered by the people when you talked about your nationality?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did not really came with any a priori. So don't forget, I was really very fresh and green. So I did not know really that maybe people, because of your background and your nationality, might treat you differently. I do not think I felt anything special, but later on, much later, a few months after I was settled, etc., I remember I had problems with with staying in Switzerland. I received at some point of time, because I was very early before the university was starting, so I was basically almost 9 months or so in Switzerland before the university starts. And as a visitor, when you come to Switzerland, of course, as a tourist, you can stay, like many countries, 90 days. And when I was in Lausanne, I asked for, because I was registered to become a student in EPFL and start my studies, but that was much later. And there was a period of time where I wanted to be in Switzerland, get acquainted, get to know around, get ready for the for my student life. But then a letter came, because I asked for an extension of my stay until I can officially have the permission as a student. That also gives you the a special type of studying visa to stay in Switzerland. And it was refused. So it was refused. I remember it was very harsh. I was alone, and I received this letter at home that says you have 2 weeks to leave the territory of Switzerland. So you can imagine for for somebody green and young and inexperienced with a lot of dreams about Switzerland.
You were not even 20.
I was not even 20, and so it was a shock. The obvious thing was I contacted my parents. My parents contacted their contacts, and Professor Jean-Pierre Stucki, who was a friend and colleague of my father, who was at EPFL at that time, the son of the president, a former president of EPFL. He put me in touch with a lawyer, and the lawyer sorted out. But that was the first time I felt, oh, you can actually.
Do you remember the name of the lawyer?
I do not remember the name of the lawyer. I can look for it, but I remember that he was also a professor at EPFL. Although he was a lawyer, he was a professor at EPFL, probably because he was also teaching there. I don't recall his name, but he definitely helped me and sorted out very, very quickly without much problem. It opened my eyes, however, to the fact that, also my nationality or where I'm from could be a problem. Something that, by the way, later on, now I have a Swiss passport, but I experience even today. We can come back to that if you are interested.
What about your friends, the people that you studied with? Were they interested to know about your country?
EPFL has always been and continues to be a melting pot of different nationalities, different cultures, and really different backgrounds. One of the difficulties I had as a foreigner when I came to Switzerland, that I think that even today people have, is that meeting Swiss people was more difficult than just meeting people from all over the world. And especially if you are in an international environment like a university, you tend to meet all sorts of people from all over the place. So I had friends from France, I had friends from Lebanon, I had friends from United States, I had Canadian friends, I had a lot of European, German, and Italian, obviously, friends. A few were Swiss. Some were Swiss-German, and even less were from the French-speaking part of Switzerland.
What you mention here is very commonly mentioned by foreign people being in Switzerland, saying that it's hard at first, at least, to be in touch with Swiss people. How do you explain that? Why is it particularly like that in Switzerland?
I think there are several reasons for that. One is that Switzerland is a very multicultural society by itself. In fact, even the definition of who is Swiss is a very, very different question. My wife is Swiss, but she's from the Italian-speaking part of the country. When we met in Lausanne for the first time, she was really like a foreigner. So you could say, I did not meet a Swiss. I meet maybe she will kill me if I say that, but an Italian maybe.
Which year was this when you met her?
I met her later on when I was on my third year of university. So this was about 1987. And in 1987, we met twice. We often mention the second one as our official encounter to our parents and to everybody. But the truth is, the first time we met was in a disco in a famous disco that still exists, I believe, in Lausanne, called the 13e siècle, the 13th century.
Well known.
It was, it's a well-known place, and a lot of young people used to go there during the weekends, and I was one of them to get away from studying and a little bit to cool off. I used to go to 13e siècle with my friends, and I recall when I was there, I saw a girl, young girl, sitting on a corner, very quiet, but everybody else was dancing. She was the only one who was sitting and was very quiet. So I somehow got attracted to the fact that she's not actually coming and dancing, and so I started talking with her, and it turns out that she was that was her first night in Lausanne, and she was studying in some local school, some commercial studies, and she was in a dorm. In the city of Lausanne, and so I invited her to dance, and then while we were dancing, she actually let me know that night was her 18th birthday. So she was turning 18 that same night. So I, without really any special prejudice, I actually kissed her to tell her happy birthday, but she misunderstood and she slapped me and she left. She slapped me and she left. So she thought I was taking advantage of her, I think. And I was very surprised. But when you are young, you say, okay, one miss, 10 other opportunities. So much later, we met by accident in the library of the University of Lausanne. And this is where she actually came to me. And she was surprised that I was actually studying, because I didn't really tell her that I was a student or anything like that. And then this is really how we started. So we started to get to know each other, and this time I was very careful to go very, very slowly and not to create a situation where she could again slap me once more and go away.
You mentioned that Switzerland indeed is a multicultural country, but why, considering that, can you explain that it is so hard to be in touch at first with Swiss people, as long as they are surrounded precisely by a lot of foreigners?
It's hard to get in touch with the Swiss people if the definition of Swiss is somebody who is born in Switzerland since many generations, for the simple reason that most foreigners who come, the younger generation is maybe different, but at least at that time, traditional Swiss, they couldn't speak necessarily English, which is one of the languages that is very, very often spoken by most of the foreigners who come and visit. So that by itself has some influence. But I also think that probably it's Swiss, when they grow up, at least at that time when they were growing up, I think they were basically making their friendship circles, and they were not necessarily curious or looking for having friends. Foreigners are hungry, right, for having friendship. Mm-hmm. They come to a country where they do not know many people, so they are much more attracted to find people, and people who are really willing to find friendship, they get together. And but maybe if you are born and since childhood have you been around, well, it's much easier for you to already have your friends. You do not necessarily look for the next guy or extending your circle of friendship with the same intensity.
It's still a mystery because Switzerland, not being the only country in the world that is multicultural, is there an explanation or something that is potentially explainable why it is like that, particularly in Switzerland? Why do you feel that Swiss people, at least when you arrived, maybe it changes a little bit today, but when you arrived, how do you explain that it was like that in Switzerland, particularly?
It wasn't particularly in Switzerland. In my own life, I lived in two other countries after Switzerland, a little bit similar to how I arrived in Switzerland. One was Japan, and one was United States. In both cases, I had difficulties in the beginning to get to know Japanese when I left to Japan to live a couple of years, and to United States when I went there. So United States, by definition, it's a melting pot, even beyond the melting pot of Switzerland. So it's, again, not that unusual to see that when you go to United States, I went to United States because I was going there for work, and in my environment of work, which was AT&T Bell Labs, there were a lot of people coming. They were taking the best of the best from anywhere in the world. So it was natural that most people I was interacting with, and most of my friends and the friends of the friends, were not Americans. The people who were, I was in New Jersey, so people who were born since generations and raised in New Jersey. So I saw that phenomenon in the United States that is probably considered to be a very open country, and also they had the same phenomenon in Japan. Now maybe in Japan the language barrier and very, very different cultural distance also played also a role. But although in all cases I ended up having at least a minority of the locals, of the local people from there to interact with, it was always a minority. And I really don't think, frankly, that the Swiss particularity is so particular. Maybe we see things and we are sensitive much more to our immediate environment. But I personally had this experience 3 times in my life.
Let us talk now about your studies.
Well, I was always attracted by logic and mathematics. It's not a cliche. I'm not saying, one of the reasons I was attracted to mathematics and logic was through interactions with my father since when I was very, very young. I used to have games, literally, with my father. My father used to give me, and he was very good in geometry. He used to give me a lot of relatively, for me at least at that time, difficult geometry problems and proofs to come up with. And I would spend hours, and through time, this kind of thing grows in you. Mathematics, a lot of people don't like it because mathematics is like beer. The first time you taste beer, it's bitter. You don't like it. The more you have beer, the more you start liking it. Now, because maybe for the love towards my father, when he was giving me something, I was really keen to really resolve that problem, and I ended up becoming good in mathematics. So, coming to EPFL, there was no other way than selecting something that would have a lot of logic and mathematic components.
a question about, let's say, the importance of math. My professor of mathematics used to say, if one day we lost every possibility of language with, let's say, ET persons coming to our planet, mathematics would be the only potentially common language we could share. Do you agree with that?
I agree. It's not the only, but definitely logic and math are part of universal language of the world, of the universe. The laws of physics also. These are part of the universal language. Music, similar. And maybe to some extent even art. So definitely math is in there. It's not the only means, but it is definitely a very, very important means of communication. People with different cultures, with different backgrounds, with different languages, they can communicate. It's true, through mathematical concepts with each other. And it's not for nothing that Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, the two deep space probes that are now out of our solar system, among others, they have a few mathematical problems also in there in order to, if ever there is aliens, at least start some sort of communication with them without having any common language.
Your thesis at the EPFL, how did you choose the subject of it, and how did it occur until you published it?
All right, so let me first go back to how I started and which discipline finally I took when I did my undergraduate study, what we call today master degree. In those days at EPFL, we only had master, but it was called Diploma of Engineering. Because of my love to mathematics, I actually wanted to do mathematics. There is a degree at EPFL called mathematical engineering. For me, this was the natural path. But again, I was influenced a lot by my father, who was my role model at that time. And he was a civil engineer. And civil engineers, you build dams, you build bridges. There is also a lot of math, but it's a different kind of math. It's more geometry. That's why my father was so good. And also another thing he was very good at was trigonometry, which is also something that is used a lot in civil engineering. So he was pushing me gently towards doing civil engineering. But somehow deep down, although I liked some of the underlying math, I did not necessarily see myself to be a civil engineer. So I wanted to be more of a pure mathematician, and he wasn't very much into that. And we decided, because he was paying my studies, I had also had to take into account his desires. We ended up as a compromise for me to follow electrical engineering. Electrical engineering has the type of math I liked, had the type of logic and the type of applications that I liked. So I started electrical engineering. And electrical engineering is a vast area, right? It starts from high voltage and transmission of electricity, all electrical machines, all the way to electronics. And in those days, computer science did not even exist at EPFL, including computer science. So it was a very, very amazing spectrum of very, very interesting areas of engineering. And one of those was robotics. again, because of my love of science fiction and robotics seemed to be something I liked. So I saw myself doing electron engineering and then continuing maybe with a PhD in robotics.
At that time, of course, we had this culture already a long time before that, of course, science fiction with robots, this sort of possibilities for even to have a servant who happens to be a machine. How did you imagine the potential future of robots, let's say, compared to what science fiction did? How did you imagine what robots of the next generations could become?
So as a young person without experience, of course, I was a lot influenced by science fiction. So for me, robotics meant humanoid robotics, androids, and these are basically walking machines with legs and hands, capable maybe of talking and interacting with their environment, taking objects, moving objects, etc. So this was for me what I had in mind in those days as what robotics was. I started, in fact, I took a lot of lectures on robotics, and I discovered soon that actually robotics wasn't at that time that. Robotics is mainly control theory and how machines can control their environments or processes. It could be even how a heater warms the water that you use to take a shower, and how the temperature is maintained at a certain level, not too hot, not too cold, and how the fuel should be injected into the heater so that the temperature is maintained at a given degree, and if somebody is taking shower, how to change the amount of fuel and the water, the cold water that has to be injected so that it can. So this is really what robotics was. That's why the more I learned about the technologies behind engineering technologies behind robotics, the more I discovered that there is some other technologies that I did not absolutely have any idea about that I liked more. And that was signal processing. So signals are everywhere again, including in control theory and including in robotics. But these signals can be of any nature. It can be audio signals, could be speech signals, could be electrical signal, it could be also images. And around the end of my third years, when I started to go to the last year of my studies to become an engineer, I took a lot of, because of the interest I saw in the world of imaging, I took a lot of courses in signal processing, digital signal processing, and image processing that at that time was really the cutting edge of this kind of engineering sciences. And I just loved it. Now, my personality was being developed too at the same time. I was becoming more and more international. My view of the world was becoming very, very global because of my friends, because of interactions I had, because I was seeing really the world finally as an adult. And I found that image processing, we talked about the language, the universal language of communication. Images are also one of those universal languages of imaging. So I really went all the way into the world of imaging. I took all my projects, because we have to have some master projects and some practical projects. I took them all in imaging. And once I finished my studies, the professor who was who was taking care of that, Murat Kunt, who was quite a phenomenon and quite a personality and very known scientist in the world of imaging in the world, offered me a position as a PhD student that I immediately accepted and started doing my PhD in imaging.
At that time, how far were we in the representation of images through, let's say, the digital language?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I started my studies in the world of imaging around 1988. So this is where I really was working on imaging. And the world of imaging was just starting to move to what was called digital image processing. Because television, photography, everything that had to do with images and pictures and videos, they were all analog. So I was one of the few students who got trained through professors who were themselves on the cutting edge. And I was very lucky because Switzerland and EPFL had such a professor here, and get exposed to the world of digital imaging.
At that time, Professor Thalmann, for instance, was known in Switzerland and around Switzerland for having created new images using real persons. One example is Marilyn Monroe, whom he treated as an image, a moving image. At that time, were you familiar with this research?
Of course, not only I was familiar with this research, I was one of the students of Daniel Thalmann, who was a professor, who became a professor at EPFL. Prior to that, he was in Montreal, Polytechnic of Montreal in Canada. Of course, but the type of imaging I was doing was a little bit different from the type of imaging that Daniel Thalmann was doing. Daniel Thalmann was doing in those days what people used to call computer graphics. How to make computers from nowhere create images and by extension video that would become very, very natural and very realistic. And that's what he was doing. The world of imaging and the type of imaging that I was exposed to was how to capture the real world, the physical world, bring it into a computer and process it, and then maybe bring it back to the world by printing or by displaying it on a computer screen. It's very close, the type of imaging I was doing was very close to image analysis, so understanding what the world is made of. When we, with our eyes, we look around us in our environment, our brain analyzes and says, oh, this is a wall, this is a door, I can go through the door, but I cannot go through the wall. And then when you get close to the door, if you want to go through the door, there might be some obstacles, so you have to recognize the obstacles in order to go around them, etc. That's why I got even interested, because don't forget, robotics, it's exactly that too. Robots, they have to see their environment. And especially humanoid robots that I had in mind and was dreaming of. These robots had to see the world around them, and that's how I was even, for the first time, through robotics, got exposed to the world of imaging. But then I loved imaging more than robots. This is what I was doing. So one of my first projects, before getting my engineering degree, was a project that was to analyze satellite images and finding them objects. Now, the reason this project was being offered was because Switzerland has bought from French government a number of Mirage fighters. And in these kind of situations, every time a country buys high-tech military equipment, there is always compensation measures. And compensation measures means that a part of the difficult things that has to be done and the research that has to be done is usually paid back to the country that bought, let's say, fighter jets. And in fact, the lab at EPFL I was part of was receiving some sort of compensation, and the world of defense in France was interested in automatically finding out if there is a satellite, if there are people in it, soldiers, meaning whether there are houses and different structures in it, whether there are tanks and trucks and other type of vehicles. And so part of this kind of fundamental research that was needed to find what are the algorithms behind that are needed for that were given as problem to the lab I was, and my supervisor gave it to me as one of my my projects that I had to do, and I just loved it. This is what I did. To answer to your question, in my undergraduate, my last project was in fact in image analysis, and particular satellite image analysis with a military application, defense application behind that was motivating it.
Would you agree with what is very commonly said, that the military is one of the major actors in technical developments? It seems obvious, but I mean, you as a scientist, do you agree with that statement?
Yes, unfortunately, that's the case. There are several reasons for that, because in military often it's a question of life or death, of your way of living, right? So the pressure in order to succeed and pressure to be efficient is much higher, because if you don't succeed, you might not be there anymore, or your country might not be there anymore. There is also a lot of, because of the same pressure, there are a lot of funding available. So that's true. The military is and has been one of the drivers in the last decades, if not centuries, for advancement of technology. But it's not the only one. The one I like, that everybody calls, in fact, the right way too, the moonshot projects, right? In the 60s, Americans, they said we have to go to the moon, and we're going to do that in the next decade. That was not necessarily a military objective, but it happened. Same type of pressure, same type of funding, and it happened. So whenever you have something that excites and federates people around, these are the type of times when a lot gets happened.
Some people justify the military money, saying, well, this puts the emphasis on the fact that this will particularly help the development of technology. Now, if you imagine a world of peace where countries consider each other as partners, in a peaceful world, do you think technology, without these pressures that you mentioned, militarily speaking, do you think they would still, these progress would still occur?
I think the progress will occur regardless. Sometimes it's between countries and supplement to be superior, technologically or otherwise. Sometimes is companies that want to be ahead of other competitors. The common point behind all them is that people are motivated to put a lot of energy and a lot of funding and a lot of time into becoming what their ambition tells them. I can give you an example today, even more examples like artificial intelligence. So we know that artificial intelligence is going to change the world if it has not already done that. So whoever has the key to the most efficient artificial intelligence will have the key to success. That's why you see countries, including Switzerland, they do not want to be left alone, left outside in the cold. They want to be part of the competition and have a stake, something that makes whatever they are doing in this broad area of artificial intelligence to be unique, to be superior to any alternative. There are other fields, quantum computing is one of them. It's not as known and as present to everybody's spirit, especially people, general public. But also, the day quantum computers become practical, the world is going to be a completely different place. There are also now different countries in the world, including Switzerland again. They have created initiatives in order to not to be left out of this trend and bring in some unique added values that nobody else brings. But I agree with you that we have always been more efficient in terms of building things when it has been peace times. The pressure and the motivation that the war, for example, brings or competition brings is true, but war also destroys. So it's a little bit of a two trends competing with each other. One trend that destroys things and one trend that constructs. And well, we continue as long as you construct faster than you destruct. If you can, through collaboration, construct without destructing, you go more efficiently. But let's not forget, competition is in the DNA of humans, and as humans, one of the things that defines us is that we really are competitive, and we always want to be not necessarily compared to others, but even compared to ourselves. We want to be better than the way we were the day before. So we compete even sometimes with ourselves, our past, our present. And this competition, I think it's healthy and should continue when it is casted in the right environment and the right spirit.
Using the image as, let's say, the key point of your studies, in which circumstances did you hear about what became JPEG, which is, of course, today one of your specialties for which you are well known in the world?
So I started my PhD in 1988, January 1989 even. And I had to pick a topic with, of course, consentment of my supervisor. Since the world of imaging that I was interested in was the world of imaging that would carry information, would facilitate. So my imaging, the type of imaging I wanted to work on and do research on, was imaging for communication. And in order to efficiently communicate, you have to have these images at a volume of information that is manageable. One of the biggest problems that digital imaging faced in the beginning of its history, which is not that long, was that digital images were absolutely too big, too voluminous for computers to handle them, computers of that time. And that naturally brought me in, and my thesis supervisor, my PhD supervisor, to thinking, let's work on this. So I started to work on image compression. So this became my main topic. And at the same time, the JPEG was being created, and some scientists around the world were doing. So it was really a very happy coincidence, because when I started to work on compression of images, a number of very, very awesome scientists around the world, very knowledgeable scientists around the world, also decided to do the same. I was, of course, a junior, not having their experience, but that also gave me another boost, because I really picked something that immediately became also a very, very big concern of a lot of people who were very, very smart. And this is how I immediately, really, you could say, the day I started working on the world of compression, I had interaction with all those who were building the JPEG standardization committee. And as I told you, these interactions, after I finished my PhD 3.5 years ago, resulted in being even part of at the end of that period, to be even part of that standardization committee.
In 1991, you were already at the head of Swiss delegation to ISO. And how did it occur? Of course, we know that you were involved, but I mean, practically, how did it happen when you arrived into this delegation that you represented since 1991, and I believe still today?
That's correct. So in 1991, I became the head of the Swiss delegation to JPEG and MPEG. But it's interesting, sometimes you see that in some startups also. I was the head of a delegation of one. So I was the only delegate who was going from Switzerland to JPEG and to MPEG standardization committees. In 1991 was 1 year before I even finished my PhD. So I was very, very junior. Not only I was only one, delegation of one, I was also very, very junior and very naive. In fact, I remember when there was a competition that was announced to define the next MPEG standard. So JPEG was being developed, but then there was a question, okay, can we do that for video? And the answer was, okay, let's ask people, do you have technologies that can do video? And my supervisor, although I was in the middle of doing my PhD, said, why don't you give it a try? You have done some work in that area. You have some original ideas. Take these ideas and bring them to the standardization committee in ISO.
You were 26 years old then.
I was 26 years old. That's very true. And I was not only 26 years old of age, sometimes 26 years old. For some things they do, they are mature enough. I was absolutely very green, very naive. I went with my system to this group of people, several hundred people. A good half of them were from United States and very large companies. The other half were basically more or less all from Japan. So it was at that time, today we say AI is a competition between China and United States. In those days, the competition was between United States and Japan.
And Japan precisely is a country that you chose because 1 year later, you went to Japan.
That's correct. So one of the reasons I ended up in Japan is because I was going to these meetings, and I got to know people. I was not so bad. I was very naive. sometimes being naive is an advantage because you come up with ideas that are out of the box. It's not in the mainstream. Sometimes lack of knowledge becomes an asset, because then you come up with things that shocks people because you are coming without absolutely any a priori. So these interactions that I had, a few ideas that I had during my days as ISO representative and head of the Swiss delegation, which means the only head of myself, helped the Japanese and especially Sony to notice me, and they invited me in 1991 already in one of their meetings. That was one of the meetings of ISO that happened in Japan. They invited me to Japan, to Sony headquarters to give a seminar. I gave a seminar. There were some discussions, and then at the end of that discussion, the big boss who was in the room present came to me and he said, "So what is it exactly that you are now doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing my PhD. I still have 1 year to finish." And he told me, "When you finish, we have a position for you here, and really give it a very, very serious thought. And but you have open door. So anytime you want, you can come here." This is what I did. As soon as I finished my PhD, instead of going to United States, which is what everybody was doing, I decided to go to Japan to be different.
How long did you stay in Japan then?
I stayed about a year and a half. You could say it's short, but it's also very long for somebody who goes to a very, very different country. That culture is very, very different. I have a few anecdotes to tell you about Japan that could probably help people who listen, especially younger one. These are experiences I learned without really thinking, but some of them turned out to be good. When I went to Japan, I did not know much except very short trips, like 1 week, about Japan or Asian culture. Now, it's not because I'm a Middle Eastern that people should think that, oh, I know Asian culture. Middle Eastern culture is very different from Asian culture. So I absolutely I had almost zero understanding of Asian culture. So it was a shock. It was definitely not a shock when I came to Switzerland, because I used to, as a child, come to Europe, to France especially, and so it was like not ordinary. It wasn't really different from the life I was used to. But when I went to Japan, it was different. The fact that I had to live in a room that was my apartment, basically, that was so large that if I would open my hands like this, I would touch the two walls, and if I would lay down, my foot will touch one wall and my head another wall. So this is the type of size that the living environment look like for somebody young who goes to Japan. One thing I absolutely remember when I went to Tokyo was the concrete. Everything was, in French they call it béton. Everything was built. I remember I came a few times to Switzerland back when I was living in Japan, and it was the first time in my life where I noticed trees and greens, and I appreciated it because I always have them around me anywhere I was until that moment when I went to Japan. And it's not for nothing that in Japan, in cities like Tokyo also, you have very, very beautiful parks that look like Central Park, Yoyogi Park in the case of Tokyo. The reason is because there is really a lot of construction, and you don't see greens. And I think that as humans, we really need to see that. And I'm convinced about that because I was never interested and attracted by any plants until I didn't have any around me for a very, very long time. And then it really was, I was feeling that it was lacking. So going to Japan for me was a big shock. But not only from environment and maybe a little bit of food, and especially the size of the food and the price. These were the things that were very expensive. Also, that made me made a shock on me. At least in those days, in the beginning of 90s, everybody thinks Switzerland is very expensive. Japan, Tokyo especially. And the central Tokyo in those days was much more expensive than Switzerland, to the point that when I went from Switzerland, which many consider as an expensive country, I found it over expensive to be in Japan. So there were a lot of shocks that you could say cultural shock. But despite that, the work was amazing.
What about your contacts with your Japanese colleagues? You mentioned earlier, and of course many people notice it, Japanese people tend to be very, very close to towards the foreigners. It's part of even their politeness to be almost segregated from the foreigners. Now, what about your contacts with the Japanese colleagues? Did you find a wall when you first arrived, or did let's say, this common work together just destroy the wall right away?
Yeah, so that's a good point too. So one of the big problems for foreigners when they go to Japan is the communication. But that's not because Japanese are necessarily a closed culture. I think that the best way for me to explain that is through a number of anecdotes. The first day of work, I did not know more than 3 words in Japanese. And I assumed that in Sony, which was the company I was hired for, I would speak English. When I went the first day, my boss welcomed me, took me to a room where every day the work would start. So the work every day started at 9:30 with a meeting of everybody in his group, in his lab. And he took me there, and then he started to say some things in Japanese, probably some general information. And then every single person who was on the table was saying something, probably in Japanese, of course, about what they were doing or what they are doing and what their issues are, etc. And then it came to me. I was just sitting, and then it came to me, and my boss told me, "Okay, your turn." I started speaking English, and he said, "No, in Japanese." So I told him, "But I only know 3 words." He said, "In Japanese, please." So I stood, and I used the 3 words that I knew. I said, "Konnichiwa," which means hello, "Arigato," which means thank you, and "Sayonara," which means bye. And I sat. These 3 words were very much appreciated, because in Japan, and that is one of the cultural differences with United States and the Western culture, it's how much effort you spent that matters and not the result. In the Western world, especially in the United States, it's the result that matters. If you make a lot of efforts or not enough efforts or little effort, it doesn't matter as long as the result is there. So this is one of the things that I learned. So in terms of culture, I had to learn a lot of things. And one of the things that I learned is that many times the reason the Japanese, they seem distant to people is because their English skills or language skill, communication skills is not good. in whatever language that English or French or German. That's why, out of respect, they actually don't interact. Not because they dislike, they are very curious. It's not for nothing you see so many Japanese tourists everywhere. They're very curious. But it's out of respect that they do not really interact. Maybe another point that really gives some another anecdote. You talked about have you been rejected because of your nationality or I didn't really feel it many times, sometimes of course, and I'm very open about it and to discuss if you want. But of course, when I was in Japan, I was a foreigner. They don't make a difference between whether you are Middle Eastern or European or North American. Everybody looks the same to them. The same way for us sometimes, every Asian looks the same. We don't make the difference between a Korean and a Chinese and a Japanese. And so it happens often, or at least in those days, it happened often that when you would go to a restaurant, the restaurant would do this to you, which is the sign of no. They would do this. And the word that they use is dame, dameda, which means no. In our Western culture, if you go somewhere and somebody says, do not enter, you would say, oh, this is racism. The only reason they do that is because they don't know how to serve you, they prefer to not to serve you rather than serving you in a bad way. So you see, there is a lot of misunderstanding. They absolutely don't have, at least to my experience, they are very curious. But as soon as you speak Japanese to them, then, oh, it's okay, come in. Because then they know that they can serve you properly in your restaurants. So my year and a half in Japan, although it was short, it was absolutely amazing. I think that Japan has been, in that 1.5 years, one of the most influential countries and culture and experiences in my entire career.
For Sony during that year, what exactly did you do?
So Sony in those days was working on a secret and futuristic project that was putting video into CD-ROMs. The audio CD existed, and they wanted to do the same, so put video into a new type of CD that would do video. So I was hired to do compression of the video for this new type of CD that it turned out to be DVD. So I'm one of the original engineers of DVD. And the part I worked, because there are different parts, of course, there is a type of laser that should be blue or green laser, so that the density of the CD is much higher than the red laser, which is what is used in audio. There are lots of hardware and material, but then there is the compression. And I was one of the engineers who worked on the compression part of it.
During that period, you also were in touch with one of the fathers of JPEG, like you're considered as one of the key fathers of this technology. So this Japanese personality, whom I believe died about a year ago, is it the time that when you met him?
I met him before. So you are talking about Hiroshi Yasuda. Mm-hmm. Hiroshi Yasuda was the person who created as an organization. So he didn't have the idea, the technology alone, although he contributed like everybody else to the technology that became JPEG and the technology that became MPEG later on. He is the person who created the group that is called and is known as JPEG. And later on, he co-created with an Italian person whose name is Leonardo Chiariglione, the MPEG group that does the same but for audio and video. I knew him before going to Japan. Probably he is one of the people who told the Sony boss who invited me to Sony to go to give a seminar, probably because he said, okay, there is this young guy, he has some probably interesting ideas, maybe you want to check him out. So invite him to give a talk and then interact with him. Maybe you can have him.
And so after Japan, you go to the States, and of course, interestingly for us, how was your reaction, and how did you compare? Because I imagine you can compare these different cultures.
True. So as any scientist in those days, I was frequently traveling to United States. But it's true that when I was in Japan, and I will be very, very open about this, after 1.5 years, although the work and the job was amazing, and despite a lot of things I was learning, living in Japan as a foreigner, for me at least, was very difficult. And the reason was because there is a big pressure, and you are really devoted only to your work, and there is nothing else. Basically, no quality of life, at least in the environment I was. So I got approached, as it is usually done. It happens a lot, by somebody in AT&T Bell Labs. They were going to work on the next generation of video telephones, a little bit like FaceTime today, but with telephones. And they needed somebody to work on the compression of the video part. So basically that's what happens very, very often. So recruiters contact companies and maybe good people in companies, experts in these areas, and they try to lure them. So I got an offer from AT&T Bell Labs to go to work with them on a compression. Now AT&T Bell Labs in those days was like Google today. Amazing, lots of Nobel Prize. For me, it was a dream place to be. I knew I was going to learn a lot, was going to be an amazing environment. But at the same time, being in Japan, in such a great environment and having such a great work environment was amazing. So I didn't want for my boss especially to feel that I prefer somewhere else more than where I was, which I really loved. And it wasn't the job, it was outside of the job that was a pressure for me. So I went and talked to him, and I explained to him, of course, it wasn't true, that life in Japan is very expensive and my salary is not very high. So I have pressure to close my months, and that my salary was too low, and so probably I'm looking, and I have another job that I have received, so I would like to leave. That was a shock to him, because in those days, not anymore in Japan, but in those days, you would go to one of these big companies, you would basically stay there forever until retirement. It was really very rare that people will quit a company, especially like Sony. He was shocked by that, and he told me, don't make any decisions, just give me 1 week. 1 week later, he asked me to go to his office. He was the only one who had an office, by the way. Everybody else was in dividers. And he told me, here, your new salary. And he had doubled my salary. Double. Then I saw that, and I was really very, very affected by really what he had done. He didn't increase by 10% or 20%, so he really wanted me to be there. So I told him the truth. I said, the truth is that it's not a question of money, it's really a question of environment. He completely understood. So, and he told me also about this is the first time he really opened up to me. He was much older, and he told me about his times and his difficulties during the Second World War, where his mother didn't have money to buy even potatoes for them to eat. They were kids. And that she had to go and sell her kimono, wedding kimono, which is something no Japanese would ever do, just to buy two potatoes for them not to starve. So we became very friends, and I continued to have interaction with him, and until he went to retirement, and then unfortunately later on he passed away. But my connection with Japan has remained. In fact, in 5 days I'm going again to Japan, and this is going to be the 6th time in 2 years. So just to give you an example. So I really have very good relationships still with Japan. But comparison with the United States was inevitable. When I went back, but this time as somebody who lives and who is a citizen, you could say, of the United States, I could see the contrast. So everything, or almost everything I lived in Japan was the opposite in the United States, in the environment I was in. I ended up in Bell Labs, which is in New Jersey. New Jersey is called Garden State, meaning that there are a lot of greens everywhere. Houses are amazingly big. So the size of my house when I went to United States was bigger than the entire building that was there, in which I had just a small apartment that I explained to you how small it was. Food, the size of the food, price of the food, everything was the opposite. The concrete and lack of plants was replaced by just greens absolutely everywhere. The density of the people in Tokyo, when I was going to work or coming back, they would literally push us into trains. We were like sardines. In New Jersey, I had to drive my car for at least 1 kilometer to see another human being. So very, very different environment. And also the work environment was very different. The work environment in Japan, for me, was, at least where I was a very collaborative environment. Everybody was collaborating with everybody. In the United States, the environment, again, I was in was very individualistic. So I had my project, another one had his project, the other one had his project. We would go probably have some food during lunchtime, but no interaction at all. So a very, very different world. Also amazing work experience, but also a very, very different environment, I would say. And everything was very, very fast in United States. Everything had to be done for yesterday. And you couldn't take time necessarily to reflect or etc. those things. So big contrast between Japan and United States. Both great, but very, very different, and both with very good positive sides and less positive sides that were not the same.
Now, of course, same question as with Japan, the contacts with the people, with your colleagues, and people, let's say, in the streets. How was it?
So in United States, people, at least again, where I was in Bell Labs, for the majority were foreigners. There were a lot of Indians and Chinese and Taiwanese especially. A lot of Koreans at that time also were my colleagues. So my colleagues were for most of them people who had studied in different top universities in the United States, but then instead of going back home, they were at least temporarily planning to have a work experience in the United States. We had contacts with of course, people, you could say, from United States. They were mostly second generation. So this is the thing, in United States, things are a little bit different. When somebody says I'm American, they can be first generation American, they can be second generation American, but they don't go much farther than that, right? So it's very rare to find somebody. So the contact, it was actually meaningless for us to say if somebody was American or somebody was not American. The only difference was how well there was American accent, but really that's it. It didn't go beyond that. It's very United States is a young nation. It doesn't have very, very long history. Of course, there are some negative parts some people see in that, but there is also the positive side that there is no a priori. Everybody is everybody. It's a lot, at least in those days, we're talking about 25, 30 years ago. In those days, it was basically you were good in what you were doing. You were successful. You weren't. It wasn't because you were from somewhere or not from somewhere, or part of this clan or that clan, or this family or that family, or this caste or that caste.
So how was your work in the States concretely?
In the United States, I worked on compression of video for video telephones. So in those days, and we are talking about mid-90s now, or early 90s, 1994-ish, I was the idea behind AT&T Bell Labs, which was basically also the telephone operator of United States, American Telephone and Telegraph, was that sooner or later people will use their telephone also to exchange communication through video, not only audio and voice. And I was working on the video side of it. And again, there the telephone lines had to remain the same. So you had to compress and push through the same channel that was designed for only speech.
At that time, some of the first machines that appeared and that were sold actually publicly were images that were sent. And for instance, it would take something like 1 minute to have one picture which cut the conversation meanwhile. Was it at that time part of the type of research you were making?
That's correct. So these kind of things were actually products. So you're talking about what was called visiophones.
Because I remember having one set myself, and it was amazing that time to see a picture appearing through a real, regular telephone, in fact.
That's correct. So this is exactly what I was working on, but not with one image every minute. It was maybe 5 or 6 images or 10 images per second. So it was not really a very, very smooth
but it was already
movie, but it was still
a big improvement.
Was moving. The quality was black and white and not very high resolution, but good enough to see on a very small screen, somebody. It turned out later on, because we actually developed the system. So what I did and other colleagues with whom we were working on different parts, then somebody had integrated it into a product, and this product was sold, but it was a big failure. And the reason was because, at least in those days, nobody wanted to have communication at home where people can see them. There is also, and this was the first time I discovered also what is called social acceptability. You could have the best ideas of the world, come up with the best technology of the world, best product of the world, but if people don't need it, then it doesn't succeed.
Is this the reason why you stopped your your work in the United States. What made you return to Europe?
An accident again. My supervisor of the time, he told me that there was an open position at EPFL, and whether I was open to apply for it and to become basically ultimately a professor at EPFL. I was very happy in my life in Bell Labs. I had very good salary. I had a very good environment. I was living the American life, let's call it like that. But by respect to him, I said, okay, I don't believe in it, but I'm gonna apply. And that's what I did. And then I was offered the position. Then, of course, there was also pressure on, at that time, not yet my wife, to go back, because I was having a distance relationship with my now wife, who was a Swiss Air flight attendant. So
this was 1993 at that time.
We are talking about 1994, end of 93, but mostly 94. Yeah.
And so when did you return to Switzerland? Actually, which year?
Absolutely. So I came back to Switzerland on 15th October 1994. I also again remember that date because when I came back, it was a very, very old October, it's cold October, and I had to dress really well to come back. Yeah.
New Jersey not being so warm by itself, in fact.
New York is in winters can get very, very cold. But New Jersey, because of the garden and the forest, etc., it's reasonable. At least that year, it was much warmer in New Jersey than I remember in Lausanne.
So when you arrived in the EPFL in 1994, end of 1994, what was your job at first?
So in the beginning, the position that I was given was what is called a research group leader. I was asked to build a research group to define the future of television. This was more or less around the time, so we're talking about end of 94, beginning of 95. This was around the time where the world had thought about also reinventing television. You probably have heard about a very famous European project called Eureka 95. Eureka 95 was the future of television from the European perspective. That, by the way, never happened really the way it was, because it was analog. So at that time, the entire world, Japanese, Americans, and Europeans were looking into reinventing television, but in this time a digital paradigm. And EPFL wanted to play a role in that and influence how this future television will look like, and created a research group, a research unit, and was looking for somebody to head it, and I applied for it and I got it.
And this was approximately the moments where HD television appeared.
That's correct. This is more or less when HD television, but analog HD television started. So television wasn't digital at that time.
And I remember that Sony precisely was one of the pioneers, and in Switzerland, one of the person who was one of the earliest believers in this technology was Claude Nobs, whom you happen to be close to later on. But back to these years, these years 19 and 90. So you believed in this future of digital high definition television.
So it didn't happen necessarily in high definition. So the first step was, can you take even the standard definition, not necessarily high definition television,
4:3 at that time,
which was an aspect ratio of 4:3, but the resolution was much smaller than high definition. So high definition brings basically two things. One is that the aspect ratio is much wider, a little bit like cinema, So it's 16 over 9 instead of 4 over 3, which is almost square, a little bit wider. So the first milestone of the roadmap was, can we even make the regular television with today's resolution, with today's aspect ratio of that time, digital? And why would you like it to make it digital? Because then you could allocate far less bandwidth to the bandwidths that are given, the air broadcasting bandwidth, to television. So instead of requiring far more bandwidth, you could reduce it to smaller, and then it would free up a lot of bandwidth. And then this bandwidth was supposed to be used for what became finally the mobile phone bandwidth for people to telephone over there. So it was, if the television was not going to become digital, it was going to be far harder and probably much more expensive to have mobile phones the way we have today. So the problem had to be resolved already at the level of television. That was standard definition. But then as soon as it becomes digital, then the door opens to a lot of other things. You can have it, why not have it high definition? And then later on, today, 4K, which is 4 times high definition. And maybe tomorrow we will have television sets that would be immersive and will have high dynamic range, much better contrast, much better luminosity and brightness. So these are part of the roadmap that is being built up little by little now, and some have happened, and some are to be happening in the near or farther away future.
At that time, the development of digital concept, digital pictures in particularly, raised questions. Already at that time, I remember, questions about the use and possibly the misuse of or the fake use of these pictures. And I think that the European Commission was concerned particularly by that. And I believe in 1999, you became an expert of ethical questions raised by these new technologies. In which circumstances did you happen to become this expert?
Okay, so this is a little bit of a longer story. I have to tell you how I got there. So I explained to you that I came back to Switzerland because there was a position open to open up a group to do research on the future of television. But for me, if I had to really go, because future television was going to happen, let's say in 5 years or 6 years, I had to have a little bit of a longer view of things. So I started in this group work not only on the future of television, but a few other things. One of the things I started working on was how to resolve a very, very big problem that would happen as soon as you create a digital content. It's the problem of copyright and ease of infringement of copyright. You know, as long as the signal is analog, if you copy an analog signal, the quality of the signal goes down. If you copy it again, the quality goes even farther.
Which allows you to see the original, go back to the original.
That at least, yes. And the value of the original remains always higher, because whenever you copy an analog signal, it's lower quality. But when you go to digital world, this doesn't happen. If you copy a digital file, you don't even know which one was original, which one was not, because they are perfectly identical. So the problem of copyright infringement and piracy of content was definitely far more serious when you would go to digital. So I started almost immediately when I started to work on new ways of compressing digital TV signals to work also on this problem, because it was going to happen. It was bound to happen. After that, shortly after, there was a research center in Geneva of the company Motorola, not very far from the Geneva airport. They had a problem. They were making chips, because Motorola used to make a lot of chipsets. They were making chips for video surveillance systems, and they wanted to differentiate compared to their competitors by putting these chipsets also privacy protection. Because another problem with video surveillance is that it invades privacy. So they came and they talked to me, and we actually did a project in my group, research group, on protection of privacy. One of the first attempts, I should say, in the world in that area. And later on, because Photoshop started to become very popular, and people started to use Photoshop to correct pictures that they were taking, that were becoming also digital, the problem of content integrity started to happen. So if I have a digital picture, how do I know it is coming from a camera, or has it been also photoshopped, if I may use this word, edited? So the combination of all these, how to protect the piracy, how to protect privacy, how to protect integrity, started to become very, very important part of my activities. And if you look at them, they are all under even a larger umbrella, which is the umbrella of ethical use of imaging technologies. So I started to look at the ethics of imaging, and this is still, as of today, one of my main activities in my research lab at EPFL.
How would you define, let's say, the fundamental ethics that has to be absolutely used regarding the picture?
I think one thing that should absolutely be there, and we are not yet there, unfortunately, is that we really need to find a way so that the provenance and the tracing of all digital information, including images and spatial images, can be known in a verifiable and reliable way. We're working on that. So we just, in the JPEG Standardization Committee, finished a standard called JPEG Trust, which has exactly this ambition. But it just finished, so we don't know if it is going to be deployed or not. And again, I have been telling you that you could have sometimes the best technologies in the world. If the social acceptability is not there, it's not going to take off. So of course, this is what you need, and there are a number of other things that it has to have as features so that it is used. One of them is that it should not, this type of information should not be used in order to identify who was behind these pictures, because privacy and protection of privacy is something important.
Yet it is something that is well known today with our telephones. As soon as a telephone identifies a certain picture, a certain person, it will suggest to combine these pictures and say, now this is Peter, this is Fred, this is your mother. Now, this implies that this artificial intelligence knows how to use your own world of people that you know.
That's correct. So artificial intelligence can do a lot of things. And by the way, currently in my lab, I'm not ready to talk about it now, but we are absolutely tackling exactly the problem that you are talking about. let me explain to you again the problem and tell you what we are really doing. Today, one of the threats that artificial intelligence in future is going to bring is that you can basically have eyeglasses like me, with cameras that you can hardly see, go around and just recognize absolutely everybody. And then go and as soon as you see the picture of somebody that is captured, go and find on the internet, on the open, all the pictures of them. And then around these pictures, if there is a bio where there was their picture, know more about them and put all these things together. And at some point, get to know somebody even better than their friends. Absolutely everything about them immediately. This is the danger. This is the danger and should be prevented. Now, how can you do this? How can you prevent such things? This requires solutions where machines and humans can see at same thing, and machines would see different than the humans would see. It makes no sense to you, probably, what I'm saying, because you say, come on, humans have eyes and machines have cameras, so when the photons arrive, it is the same. So how can you make a difference? Well, the answer is you can make a difference. And that's exactly what we are working on, and hopefully soon we will be able to publish about this, and I will be able to share more with you about exactly how it works too.
With JPEG and the fact that it's opened and used by developers, let's take the example of Photoshop that everybody knows. And of course, everybody knows what Photoshop allows you to do in terms of working on a picture and transforming the original picture. When Photoshop decided to use JPEG being open, did they contact you to say, okay, we're going to use, and did you have the possibility of reminding them of what it means in terms of ethical questions?
So one of the beauty of open standards like JPEG is that you don't need to contact the committee in order to be able to use it. That's the difference between a standardization committee and a company that might have a product, and if you want to use part of that product or some components of something, you have to contact the company because they might have IP, but also maybe you need their help in order to do that. In JPEG committee, things are done in such a way that the JPEG experts are not needed in order to use JPEG. So the answer is no. Adobe didn't, although Adobe is part of JPEG experts. So there are people from Adobe who come since decades to JPEG meetings, including now. The JPEG Trust that I just mentioned is, in fact, has a lot of input from Adobe
So you do have contacts with them?
We have contact with them, but in general, there is no requirement. So Adobe does not come to JPEG committee because they need help in their products like Photoshop. They know perfectly how they do it themselves without the need of experts. It's more the other way around. Adobe comes to JPEG because they are in the ecosystem of imaging. They see problems, they see challenges, they need solutions, and they understand these solutions should become international standards because they want it to become interoperable. That's why they come to JPEG, because they want JPEG and they want to encourage JPEG, and sometimes even they initiate and they lead initiatives in order for JPEG to develop something that they can use, but also everybody else, and create a critical mass. We call it ecosystem. JPEG 1 standard, the .jpg, all what it did is that it created an ecosystem, because everybody in the world, whether you do a hardware, a camera, whether you do a software, like an editing software, whatever you do,
But would you say
You
that
have to you know how to include and use JPEG in it.
so Adobe, as you mentioned, is part of this reflection group concerning ethics, and also what do you consider they're ready to do in one way to allow, let's say, the whole world to do transformations, and on the other hand, try to limit, let's say, the abuse of this technical possibility?
Yeah. So, you know, not only in the case of Adobe, but in case of any commercial company, there are a number of, let's call them compromises that should be done for a number of things that are in competition. One of them is return on investment and commercial value of something versus having it free and openly used. A good example of that is PDF, right? So to create PDF, Adobe keeps a lot of it for themselves. But to read PDF files, it's completely open. Anybody can implement. You can go tomorrow, write a code and implement it. There is absolutely no problem. It's even explained how it is. There are libraries, software, etc. you can use for that. So one tension is this: how much of it you keep to make you different and have an added value compared to competitors. But if you keep it as a proprietary solution, then you cannot really touch the whole world. Only your customers can do. The customers of others cannot use, and that limits the size of the market. So sometimes it's better to have a bigger pie and a smaller pie, part of that bigger pie, and it will be larger than if it's a small pie and you have it all. So that's one tension. The second tension is open and ethically 100% flexible and good solutions versus solutions that are commercial, but maybe they are not 100% ethical. There is a tension. Often it's not the same people, right? So people who are usually in the research or ethics departments of these companies, they, of course, push towards having everything very ethical because that's their job. But at the same time, those who are in the commercial and marketing and sales and product development, they push back and say, yeah, but if we do it too far, then we might not really have enough return on investment. So these things exist, but they don't really happen in the standardization committee or in open forum. Every company, especially large company, they have this internal debate in order to find where is the right compromise.
Mr. Touradj Ebrahimi, among the many interests that you have and that you demonstrated throughout your career, there's also one thing, your interest for preserving the values of what is created. And I will use one example. I'm sure there would be many others, but one important example of your activity. You supported the preservation of all the archives that Claude Nobs, founder of the Montreux Jazz Festival, created. And I would like you to tell us how it occurred, your meeting with him, I believe in 2008, and how you became, concerned with the fact that it was needed to preserve this collection of concerts and all the things that are now preserved through the help of EPFL in Lausanne.
Yeah, so this is a very long story that started well before I really came into the picture. It started in 1967 with Claude Nobs himself, who was tasked by the tourist office of Montreux to really bring in some events, and then he decided it to be a jazz festival. And he was lucky because in the city of Montreux also every year there was something called a TV symposium. And so somehow the whole world was bringing to his hometown the latest technologies in the world of imaging. And so he was, from the beginning, using the latest and best technologies to record and archive the Montreux Jazz Festival. So starting 1967, all the way to when I came to the picture, which was in 2008. And in 2008, basically, there was decades and decades, almost 50 years, of content that was recorded, thousands of hours of audio and video, but they were heterogeneous, meaning that technology was changing, and what was recorded, for example, in the 70s was on a technology that was different from the 90s, it was different from 2000. And the lifetime of the support, the tapes, for example, that were used to keep this data were also limited. So there was time to really go and design and come up with something that would be far more sustainable in the future. This discussion and all these things, they took place in the years 2000. I do not know exactly when, but maybe 2005 or 2006, between the president of EPFL, who not only was the president of EPFL, but he was also very, very much interested in art. And of course, Montreux Jazz Festival was one of the great artistic achievements of Switzerland, at least as a collector of the information and the data. And through the discussion, they decided that EPFL would help Claude Nobs to go and revisit and really do the amazing work that he had done in a way that there could be a copy or copies of the archive, so that if something happens, it can happen, right? There can be fire, there can be flood, there can be earthquake, etc. This all doesn't disappear. So I was contacted by Patrick Ebischer around 2007, and this was the first time.
The boss of EPFL, by the way.
The president of EPFL, and he took me to Claude Nobs, and this is when I met him for the first time in person. Of course, everybody knows him, so it was the first time I met him, and he made a tour of his amazing chalet and also the archives that are there. It was really very, very impressive. This is where I also got to know better his partner,
Thierry
Amsalem. And Thierry Amsalem, he is also himself a very technology driven person. He really loves technology. We really got along, and we still are in contact on a regular basis. And this is how it started. What I really did was really little, because I was evolving in the world of audio and video coding, and archival at the end uses a lot that technology. I designed a system, an architecture that can do that based on my knowledge in the foreseeable future, and that's the system that is really used. But my part in this has been really one of the you could say soldiers of this army of people who are again around the preservation of this magnificent recording and archive of the Montreux Jazz Festival.
With 5,000 hours of recording approximately.
So that was the case around 2008, but now it's probably the double, because we are far
moving
more
forward
in future.
In 2008, precisely, you had a meeting with the co-founder of Microsoft and Claude Nobs. Tell us about this meeting.
Yes, so these things are not cheap. And if you want to do it right, you need philanthropes. You need sponsors who do this for the beauty of the thing. And I remember one such person that was identified was Paul Allen, who was the co-founder of Microsoft together with Bill Gates. Paul Allen, he left Microsoft quite early. He created his own venture capital, and the money that he made out of Microsoft, at least part of it, he invested in other ventures called Vulcan Capital. And Vulcan is, by the way, the name of the planet of Mr. Spock, which is a character in a science fiction
Star Wars
movie called Star Wars. Star Trek.
Star Trek, sorry.
Star Trek, yes. And so I remember, I didn't even make the connection, but I remember that we went to a trip to Seattle to meet Paul Allen. And the reason we wanted to meet Paul Allen is that Paul Allen has spent hundreds of millions into making a building and creating a museum of around music in Seattle called MXP, Music Experience Project. An impressive work, and he had really sponsored all of it. And so we thought he would be interested in also helping in the preservation of the Montreux Jazz Festival, and maybe through some agreement, some of it could be shown in his MXP venue, and maybe as a permanent exhibit or something like that. So we went there. These people, of course, are always very busy, so they gave us 15 minutes. And so we waited quietly, and when it came our time, we went to the office, we sat. And I remember there was a statue of Mr. Spock from planet Vulcan, who was on the table. And I didn't know that he was really a fan of Star Trek, but I told you, I've been always a very, very big fan of science fiction, especially Star Trek. And so I said, Mr. Spock, and that's why then you call your venture capital Vulcan. I did not make the connection. And the 15 minutes of discussion we had turned into more than an hour of discussion. And I just learned later on that Claude Nobs also was very, very fan of Star Trek. But we had really amazing discussion during that time. And that opened the door for him to come and visit not only Montreux Jazz Festival, Montreux Jazz Archive, but even EPFL. And he actually funded a number of activities at EPFL and a lot of things until unfortunately passed away shortly after.
Mr. Touradj Ebrahimi, very often people talk about you as the president of JPEG. Is there a real function named president?
No, we don't have we don't use the word president.
Why is it used by I read it in the press or other places? Why do
I think that, they probably, they just translate or they use a synonym of what we really use. So in standardization committees, usually you have a person who is like president or chairman, but we call the person the convener. The convener is the person who brings in whoever should be around the table and sets the agenda. I think practically speaking, you could say that's the job of a chairman or a secretary general or a president. But the word that we use in the standardization And that's not only for JPEG, it's the same for MPEG and many, many other standardization activities in ISO and IEC and even sometimes in other places. The word is convener. Convener is a word that is used to denote people who convene meetings.
As a convener, precisely, but of course you are not just a convener. You're a person who actually puts your hands into the job of making this research. You were for that rewarded many times, let's say many times, even just a few weeks ago in Lausanne again, but this was one of the many times. In 2022, you received a prize, and I believe you almost refused it.
Yeah, that's a good question. So let me first tell you that being the face of JPEG comes with a number of positive things. And one of them is that, yeah, people give you awards because they cannot give award to unknown. So they give to some people. But it's true that many of the awards I've received, it has been, I do not deny the fact that I've played a key role in them, but I have not been the only one. Just that there are so many that they give it to me. But yeah, the 2022 award that you are talking about,
SMPT,
it's the SMPT Progress Medal. It has an interesting story because I personally knew about this award, but I never thought that I would be even contacted about this award. And I had not the slightest idea that somebody had considered me. Let me tell you what this the award is. SMPT is Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineering. So basically, it's both the audio side of it and the photographic side of it, and the cinematographic, the movie and the television side of it. So all the engineering behind what we call, in an extended way, television and cinema and photography. So there is a lot of technology behind it. It's a very old award. The first person who received it was in 1937. So that's even, before the Second World War. And it was given in the beginning for a lot of work that was done in audio reproduction. Then later on, it became for video production. So a lot of people who really created the cinema as we know it and created Hollywoods and Bollywoods of the world, the key engineering work, those who were behind it. So a lot of it was that, like for example, the person who invented the best technology to reproduce color received it. Then later on, animation. Animation, it's easy. Everybody knows that person. The person who really brought in animation was Walt Disney. So Walt Disney actually received it too in the 40s. Later on, of course, surround and immersive sound was invented. So many times when you go, or at least used to go to the old and the new digital and analog cinema, you were in the room in what was called immersive sound or surround sound. The surround sound was an invention by Dolby. That's why you always see the name Dolby when there is surround sound, because they copyrighted even the term. Ray Dolby, for example, he received it too. And then later on, you could imagine now why I was very surprised to receive an email when I was walking in the streets of Stresa, northern Italy, south of Switzerland, on the Lake Como, just on the south part. I was in the street of Tresa with my family. We were walking, and I have this email that came from SMPT announcing that I had received this award and congratulating me. And you know that we receive a lot of these kind of things that we have been selected, we have won tens of millions, etc. So I thought it was a spam. So I was about to delete it and move on, but then I saw it was talking about JPEG, and it seemed to know a little bit too much about my achievements in a more sophisticated way that a spammer or a fraudster would know. So I didn't delete it. I forwarded it to somebody in SIMTI I knew, and I asked them, is this genuine or not? And then later on, a couple of days later, I received the answer, oh yeah, absolutely, this is absolutely genuine, and you have to contact the person. But I don't think I didn't really refuse it, just that I was about to delete it. And fortunately, I didn't.
And of course, some rewards will probably come again, because you're still active and creating. How do you feel towards these recognitions that are more and more common? And of course, the fact that you are here sitting in front of me is one of the examples of what we try to do, is to preserve, let's say, the memory of all the things that you've been doing. So how do you feel about that?
Well, it's like any human. So I'm not somebody who is necessarily doing or has done things for the recognitions, quite frankly. So sometimes it's embarrassing because to be on the spotlight usually is not something I would say I put on the top of my list. I prefer. Like any human being, to be recognized by my peers, but then beyond that, it's not always on top of my list. But also there is the concept that there is this word in English, imposters feeling. So everything I've done, because I didn't do like Albert Einstein, who from scratch created a new theory of physics called relativity. Everything I've done in my life has been building on top of the work that many, many smart people have done. So cutting and saying which part is mine and which part is theirs is extremely difficult. And so it's always the feeling of embarrassment also that, oh, do I really deserve that? Because, okay, I did this. Nobody else did. I was the first one. I did it. It worked well. It is recognized. But it would have not existed if these other people had not done some things before I'm doing. So there is this side of it too. That you feel always that you probably don't deserve these recognitions. And I'm again very, very openly telling you, I don't think that the degree of recognition that I've received for my work is as much as sometimes people think, because I was, first of all, very lucky to be on the right time and the right place. And secondly, it was thanks to other people's work that I have been able to build further. It's like making the roof of a house. Then people say, "Oh, great!" or the windows, or the outside of the house. But then the house would have not existed if somebody had not digged in, had put the foundations, had made a lot of things that are not necessarily visible, but a house would not exist without them.
Mr. Ebrahimi, you are still active, you are still making research, and I would like, as a last question, talk about something that concerns the whole world today with its possible consequences: artificial intelligence. How would you say, let's say, the priorities for you in this direction? How would you define what really is urgent to think of and to do about that?
Yeah, so, I don't think artificial intelligence is necessarily fundamentally different from prior technologies that came. The big difference between artificial intelligence and what we had before is that it's moving very fast and it is becoming accessible to a lot of people very, very quickly. And on one hand, it's really good. On one hand, it's really good because putting this tool that is called artificial intelligence at the hand of people, there are a lot of beautiful things can be done. But also at the same time, these tools are really very powerful tools. It's almost like a gun. And giving a gun to a person who really does not have the proper understanding of the damages also that a gun can do and the limitations of what a gun can do is very, very critical also. Otherwise, there can be irreversible damages. So if you ask me what is the biggest challenge in AI, I'm going to surprise you. It's not the technology. The biggest challenge in AI is building awareness and making people understand and doing a lot of effort in training of people. I've heard people sometimes compare, for good reason sometimes, for not good reason some other times, artificial intelligence with nuclear energy. Nuclear energy or nuclear technology rather can be used for a lot of great things. We can create energy. It can be used for lots of medical devices to cure people in health, etc. But it can also make weapons. And it's not for nothing that it has been treaties, and a lot of countries around the world have been signing treaties to really put boundaries on their use, because it can, if it's not carefully used, it can really end up finishing the humanity as we know it. I don't like this comparison between AI and nuclear technology. One of the reasons is because nuclear technology, you have to be a big government or a big company to be able to. You cannot just at home build your nuclear reactor, at least not yet. So I think this comparison has its limitations. I like another comparison. I like to compare AI with automobile. When automobiles started to exist, in the beginning, there was no governance. There was nothing. And this created lots of damages, right? People started to use cars without really being trained to use the cars. They either killed themselves or killed other people. There were accidents. But that was a car. So the consequences was not huge. It was bad, but not planetary. At some point, we said, you cannot drive a car if you're not trained. You have to have a driver's license in order to use the car. Why countries around the world, they require, I don't think there is a single country in the world that doesn't require a driver's license to buy a car and run it and drive it. So I think we need something similar.
Like for drones, for instance, where drones was for everyone.
Automobiles,
today.
drones, all vehicles, the boats, etc. They are all, these are powerful machines that can cause also damage. In order to use them, you have to go to some training to understand at least what are their limitations and how to use them, and then you can use them. I think for AI, the biggest challenge we have is this, because it's not going to be done easily, right? Because at the same time, training means that you have adding obstacles, and it's not all positive, right? Putting obstacles for people to use AI the way they want. So I recognize it's not a very, very easy task to do. So it's not a very straightforward and cannot be simplified as much as I did now. But I think it's closer in terms of analogy to compare AI with. And by the way, car manufacturers cannot just go and build any car they want. There are also certification on cars. So there are a lot of analogies between AI. So those who build services and product based on AI, they should also be certified.
Plus, there is we also observe a marriage between the car and artificial intelligence.
That's true. So that's
another.
It happens that it's happened. Yeah, but that AI is used also everywhere, including in cars.
And of course, today in 2025, with all these political changes and of course what the world is experiencing today, would you consider globally as an optimistic person?
Oh yes, I think that every researcher, every scientist, in their heart are very, very optimistic, at least about what they are doing. Otherwise, they wouldn't do, because otherwise they wouldn't be motivated. You cannot pretend liking something for such a long time if you really are not optimistic about this future and driven by it. Definitely. I think not only I am optimistic in general, but especially optimistic about the future of technologies I'm working on.
Mr. Touradj Ebrahimi, thank you very much for this long, extended interview, during which we have had the possibility of discovering the technologies, JPEG of course, but all the other approach that you have been active in. Thank you very, very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Si vous souhaitez voir d'autres vidéoportraits, consultez le site Vitasummus qui met en ligne régulièrement nos interviews filmées réalisées à partir de 1978.